The morning sun cast long shadows across Willow Creek Estates, painting the manicured lawns in golden hues that would have been picturesque if not for the storm brewing between the Henderson property and the Homeowners Association. At 78 years old, Samuel Sam Henderson had seen enough battles in his lifetime, from the rice paddies of Vietnam to the corporate boardrooms of Detroit, but nothing had prepared him for the suburban warfare that was about to unfold in his own backyard. It started innocuously enough, as most neighborhood disputes do. The Henderson family had lived at 1247 Maple Ridge Drive for 37 years, back when the subdivision was nothing more than a developer's dream and a handful of spec houses, scattered among actual maple trees. Sam had watched the neighborhood grow from a quiet collection of young families into a sprawling maze of cookie-cutter homes, each with its own perfectly proportioned lawn and regulation-approved mailbox. The trouble began 3 weeks earlier when Sam's grandson, Tyler, moved back home after his deployment in Afghanistan. The 26-year-old Marine had seen things that aged him beyond his years, and coming home to his grandfather's house was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place to heal and figure out his next chapter. What Tyler didn't expect was to become entangled in a petty suburban power struggle that would make his grandfather a legend in the neighborhood. Tyler's 1987 Chevy Silverado was the source of the initial complaint. The truck was a beauty in Sam's eyes, steel blue with chrome bumpers, and a slight lean to the left from years of honest work. It had been Tyler's pride and joy since high school, restored piece by piece in Sam's garage during summer vacations. But to the newly elected HOA president, Miranda Blackwell, it was an eyesore that violated Section 4.2.7 of the Community Covenant. No vehicles over 15 years of age may be parked in driveways or streets for more than 48 hours without prior written approval. The first notice came on official letterhead, delivered by certified mail with the kind of bureaucratic precision that made Sam's blood pressure spike. Miranda Blackwell had moved into the neighborhood just 18 months prior, purchasing the largest house on the block with money from her divorce settlement and immediately positioning herself as the guardian of property values. She had shoulder-length blonde hair that never seemed to move, even in wind, and wore pantsuits to neighborhood barbecues. "Grandpa, you don't have to fight this," Tyler had said, crumpling the violation notice in his calloused hands. "I can park the truck at the VA Center downtown." But Sam Henderson was not a man who backed down from bullies, whether they wore enemy uniforms or carried clipboards and measuring tapes. "Son, I didn't spend 2 tours in Nam and 40 years paying taxes to let some transplant tell me what. I can park in my own driveway." The second notice arrived a week later, this time with a 48-hour deadline and a threat of fines. Sam responded by parking the Silverado directly in the center of his driveway, washing and waxing it until it gleamed like a middle finger pointed directly at the HOA office. He even hung a small American flag from the antenna, knowing it would drive Miranda crazy, but also knowing she couldn't complain about patriotic display without looking like a complete villain. The third notice never came. Instead, Miranda escalated. On a humid Tuesday morning in late June, Sam was tending to his tomato plants when he heard the unmistakable sound of diesel engines rumbling down Maple Ridge Drive. Through the chain link fence that separated his backyard from the common area behind the houses, he watched as a convoy of white trucks pulled up to the small park that served as the neighborhood's crown jewel. The trucks belonged to Pinnacle Security Solutions, the private firm that Miranda had convinced the HOA board to hire for enhanced community protection. The lead vehicle was a modified Ford F-350 with light bars, a push bumper, and the kind of aggressive styling that suggested its driver had watched too many police procedural shows. Behind the wheel sat Officer Dale Kramer, a man whose security guard uniform was a little too tight and whose sunglasses were a little too dark for someone whose primary responsibility was writing parking tickets. Dale Kramer was everything Sam despised about petty authority. At 34, he had failed the police academy twice, washed out of private security firms in 3 different states, and finally found his calling in the gray area between legitimate law enforcement and neighborhood. "Watch, Captain." He drove his patrol truck like he was chasing bank robbers instead of checking for unauthorized garden gnomes, and he had made it his personal mission to bring the Henderson family to heel. The confrontation that would define the summer began. At approximately 10:47 a.m., when Officer Kramer decided to park his patrol truck directly on top of Sam's fence. Not beside it, not near it. On top of it. The chain-link barrier that Sam had installed in 1987 to keep his late wife's flower garden safe from wandering dogs had become collateral damage in Kramer's attempt to intimidate the old man. The security truck's massive tires had crushed a 6-foot section of fencing, leaving twisted metal and destroyed posts in its wake. Sam discovered the destruction when he walked around to check his morning glory vines, coffee mug in hand and reading glasses perched on his nose. For a moment, he simply stood there, taking in the scene with the kind of calm that precedes a hurricane. The patrol truck sat there like a sleeping beast, its weight having flattened not just the fence, but also 3 years' worth of careful landscaping. "Well, I'll be damned," Sam muttered, setting down his coffee and pulling out his phone to take pictures. His hands were surprisingly steady as he documented the damage from multiple angles, the old soldier in him understanding the importance of evidence. Officer Kramer emerged from the truck with the swagger of a man who believed he was untouchable. His utility belt jangled with unnecessary equipment, handcuffs, pepper spray, a baton, and a radio that he used to communicate with exactly no one since he was a one-man operation. His badge gleamed in the morning sun, though anyone who looked closely would notice it said security rather than anything that might indicate actual law enforcement authority. "Morning, Henderson," Kramer said, his voice carrying the kind of false friendliness that made Sam's skin crawl. "Looks like you've got a little fence problem there." Sam's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. "Looks like you've got a parking problem there, son." "I'm conducting official HOA business," Kramer replied, pulling out a clipboard and pretending to review paperwork. "This area is designated for community security vehicle access. Your fence was installed without proper permits and encroaches on common property." The lie was so brazen that Sam actually laughed. "Boy, I helped survey this property line in 1987. That fence has been there longer than you've been out of diapers, and it's sitting exactly where it's supposed to be sitting." Kramer's face flushed red beneath his artificially darkened sunglasses. "Are you questioning my authority, sir?" "I'm questioning your intelligence," Sam shot back, his patience finally beginning to fray. "And your driving ability. And your basic human decency." The two men faced each other across the destroyed fence, representatives of two different generations and two very different ideas about respect and authority. Kramer represented the new suburban order, rules enforced by people who had never earned the right to enforce them, power wielded by those who had never truly been tested. Sam represented something older and more dangerous, a man who had earned his stripes in places where the consequences of weakness were measured in body bags rather than HOA fines. "You've got 24 hours to remove that vehicle from the driveway," Kramer said, pointing at Tyler's Silverado with theatrical authority, "and you'll be responsible for any damage to common property caused by your illegal fence." Sam's response was quiet, but carried the kind of weight that made smart men step back. "And you've got about 10 seconds to get that truck off my property, before I call the real police." "This is common property," Kramer insisted, but Sam noticed he had taken a step backward. "Son, I've had surveyors, lawyers, and 3 different contractors confirm that property line over the years. You're sitting on my land, you've destroyed my fence, and you're testing my patience. I'm 78 years old, which means I'm running out of time to be polite." The standoff might have escalated further, but Tyler's arrival changed the dynamic completely. The young Marine had been running errands in town when his grandfather texted him a photo of the destroyed fence, and he'd driven home with the kind of controlled fury that comes from months of dealing with military bureaucracy and incompetent leadership. Tyler Henderson looked every inch the Marine he was, 6'2", broad shoulders, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can handle whatever comes your way. His presence seemed to fill the space around the confrontation, and Officer Kramer suddenly found himself facing not just an elderly man, but a trained soldier who had seen real combat and had little patience for petty tyrants. "There a problem here, Grandpa?" Tyler asked, his voice calm but carrying an undertone that made Kramer's hand move instinctively toward his radio. "Just explaining to Officer Kramer here that he's parked on our property and owes us a fence," Sam replied, his own voice becoming more relaxed now that backup had arrived. Tyler surveyed the damage with the practi. What happened next would become the stuff of neighborhood legend, passed down through barbecues and block parties for generations to come. But the story that most people would tell, about a crazy old man who dragged a security truck into a creek, would miss the most important details, the ones that transformed a simple act of property defense into something approaching poetry. Tyler Henderson moved with military precision toward the garage, his boots crunching on the gravel driveway while his grandfather maintained his position near the destroyed fence. The logging chain Tyler retrieved wasn't just any piece of equipment. It was a 30-foot length of grade 70 steel that Sam had purchased in 1983 to clear the back portion of his property. It had pulled oak stumps the size of washing machines, dragged fallen trees after ice storms, and once helped extract a neighbor's car from a drainage ditch during a particularly nasty flood. The chain weighed nearly 60 pounds and gleamed, with the kind of purposeful menace that made Officer Kramer take an involuntary step backward. "Now, son," Sam said, his voice carrying the patient tone of a grandfather explaining something to a slow child. "I'm going to hook this chain to your truck, and then I'm going to use my tractor to relocate your vehicle to a place where it won't be violating my property rights." Miranda Blackwell had her phone out now, presumably calling for backup, though whether she was contacting actual police or more HOA reinforcements remained unclear. "This is destruction of property. Theft. I'm documenting everything." "Ma'am, you're absolutely right," Sam replied with devastating politeness. "You are documenting everything, including the part where your employee destroyed my fence, trespassed on my property, and refused multiple requests to remove his vehicle from private land." Tyler had fired up the John Deere, a 1975 Model 2030 that Sam had maintained with the kind of obsessive care usually reserved for vintage sports cars. The tractor rumbled to life with a diesel growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself, announcing that playtime was officially over. But as Tyler began backing the tractor toward the patrol truck, something unexpected happened that would add a twist no one saw coming. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, the 73-year-old retired librarian who lived next door, stepped forward with the authority of someone who had spent 40 years managing unruly teenagers and overdue book fines. "Samuel Henderson," she said in the voice that had silenced countless study halls, "before you do something that might land you in legal trouble, you should know that young Mr. Kramer there has been parking that truck in different spots around the neighborhood for weeks, taking pictures through people's windows." The revelation hit the gathered crowd like a physical blow. Suddenly, Officer Kramer wasn't just an overzealous security guard. He was potentially something much more sinister. "That's not true," Kramer protested, but his voice cracked like a teenager's. Mrs. Patterson pulled out her own phone, scrolling through what appeared to be a substantial collection of photographs. "I've been documenting his activities because something didn't seem right. Here he is parked outside the Williams house at 6 a.m. taking pictures of their bedroom windows. Here he is behind the Martinez family's pool house during their daughter's graduation party. And here," she paused for dramatic effect, "here he is going through the Johnsons' garbage at 4 in the morning. The mood of the crowd shifted, dramatically. What had been a property dispute suddenly felt like something that required actual law enforcement intervention. Tyler shut off the tractor and pulled out his own phone. "Mrs. Patterson, would you mind sending those photos to me? I think we need to call the real police after all." Miranda Blackwell's face had gone pale. "Officer Kramer is conducting routine. Security patrols authorized by nobody," interrupted Mr. Chen, who had been taking his own notes. "I'm on the HOA board, Miranda, and we never authorize surveillance of private homes or garbage collection monitoring." The revelation that Miranda had been operating outside her authority added another layer to the unfolding drama. Officer Kramer looked like a man who was beginning to realize he had wandered into quicksand, but Sam Henderson was not a man to be distracted from his primary objective. "Tyler, start that tractor back up. Whatever else this boy has been up to, he's still got his truck parked on my fence." "Grandpa, maybe we should wait for the police." "Son, I've been waiting for justice for 3 weeks. I'm not waiting any longer." What Sam Henderson did next demonstrated why he had survived Vietnam, raised 3 children, and built a successful business from nothing. Instead of simply dragging the patrol truck backward into the street, He had Tyler position the John Deere at a precise angle that would pull the vehicle not just off the fence, but along a specific trajectory that would take it down the gentle slope behind his property. The logging chain attached to the patrol truck's rear tow point with a metallic clank that sounded like a cell door closing. Sam climbed onto the tractor behind Tyler, his 78-year-old frame moving with surprising agility. "Where exactly? Are we taking this truck, Grandpa?" Tyler asked as he engaged the tractor's transmission. Sam's smile was the kind that had once made enemy soldiers very nervous. "Well, son, Willow Creek is about 100 yards down that slope. Seems like a good place for Officer Kramer to cool off and think about his life choices." The first 50 feet of the operation went smoothly. The patrol truck, despite its size and weight, moved obediently behind the tractor as Tyler carefully navigated around the larger oak trees and avoided the flower beds that Sam's late wife had planted decades earlier. Officer Kramer ran alongside, his vehicle shouting threats and demands that went largely ignored by everyone present. Miranda Blackwell was screaming into her phone, though whether she was talking to lawyers, police, or her insurance company remained unclear. The growing crowd of neighbors followed the procession like spectators at a particularly slow-moving parade, most of them recording everything on their phones. But the real twist came when they reached the creek. Willow Creek, which had seemed like a suitable destination for an unwanted patrol truck, turned out to be running higher and faster than anyone had expected. Recent rains upstream had transformed the normally placid waterway into something approaching actual whitewater, complete with rapids, fallen logs, and a current strong enough to move substantial obstacles. "Grandpa," Tyler said, eyeing the rushing water with the caution of someone trained to assess dangerous situations, "that creek's moving pretty fast." "All the better," Sam replied. "Might wash some of the nonsense out of that boy's head." Tyler positioned the tractor at the edge of the creek bank, a drop of about 8 feet that would put the patrol truck directly into the fastest moving section of water. But as he prepared to unhook the logging chain and let gravity complete, the job Officer Kramer made a decision that would transform him from antagonist to something approaching a tragic figure. Instead of stepping back and letting his truck take its punishment, Kramer grabbed onto the tailgate as the vehicle began to slide down the embankment. "Dale, let go!" Miranda screamed from the top of the bank. But Officer Dale Kramer, faced with the destruction of his symbol of authority and possibly his livelihood, made the kind of panicked decision that people make when they're watching their world collapse in real time. He held on. The patrol truck hit the creek with a splash that sent water 20 feet in every direction, immediately beginning to list as the current grabbed it and started pushing it downstream. Kramer, still clinging to the tailgate, found himself waist-deep in cold, fast-moving water, trying to save a vehicle that was already lost. Tyler was off the tractor and moving toward the creek before anyone else realized what was happening. Despite everything Kramer had done, the young Marine wasn't about to watch someone drown over a neighborhood dispute. "Sir, let go of the truck," Tyler shouted as he scrambled down the embankment. "The current's too strong." But Kramer, in his panic and desperation, made an even worse decision. Instead of releasing his grip on the tailgate, he tried to climb into the truck bed, apparently believing he could somehow drive the vehicle out of the creek from the back. What happened next was physics at its most unforgiving. The patrol truck, caught by the current and weighted down by water flooding through its open windows, began to roll. Officer Kramer, still in the truck bed, disappeared beneath the surface as the vehicle completed a full rotation and began moving downstream like a very large, very expensive piece of driftwood. Tyler hit the water without hesitation, his military training overriding his personal feelings about the man he was trying to save. The creek was cold enough to take his breath away, and the current was stronger than it had looked from the bank. He fought his way to where Kramer had gone under, diving beneath the surface in water so muddy he couldn't see his own hands. Sam Henderson watched his grandson risk his life to save a man who had been tormenting their family and felt a pride so fierce it threatened to overwhelm him. This was what he had tried to teach Tyler during all those summers working on the property, that being strong meant protecting people, even people who didn't deserve it. Tyler surfaced with Kramer in a rescue hold, both men gasping and fighting against the current that wanted to carry them downstream with the patrol truck. Mrs. P,